My name is Petra Solano. I'm 30 years old. And the Tuesday morning a mediator opened a session my family had scheduled to remove me from my grandfather's estate and read aloud from a document none of them had seen, was the morning I finally understood that the people who call meetings to take things from you rarely check whether the thing was ever theirs to take. The notice came on a Sunday. A text from my Aunt Marguerite, forwarded to me by my cousin Danny, who had been added to a planning thread I was not part of, and who sent it to me with 2 question marks and nothing else. The text read, "Mediation scheduled for Tuesday, 10 a.m., Whitfield Center, Suite 4. We need to correct what Grandpa did before he lost his mind. Bring nothing. This will be handled by professionals." There were 7 people on the thread. I was not one of them. My grandfather had died 11 weeks earlier. I read the message standing in my kitchen. I set my phone on the counter. I filled a glass of water and drank half of it. Then I went to the room I use as an office and opened the second drawer of the filing cabinet where I keep documents that belong to other people but that I am responsible for, and I took out a folder with my grandfather's name on the tab. I had been keeping that folder for 4 years. I knew exactly what was in it. What none of them knew, what my Aunt Marguerite had not thought to verify before she scheduled a mediation and told 7 people it would correct what my grandfather had done, was that a certified copy of the trust document she intended to challenge had been submitted to the mediator's office 48 hours before the session. Not by my attorney, by the mediator's own intake process, which requires all parties to submit relevant estate documents in advance. My grandfather's attorney had filed that document with the mediator's office the morning the mediation was scheduled, because my grandfather's attorney had been notified of the mediation before I had. The folder I brought to Whitfield Center on Tuesday morning contained 1 document. I did not need it. The mediator already had hers. I want to tell you who my grandfather was before I tell you what the mediator read, because the trust document is his decision, and his decision belongs inside the life that made it. His name was Aurelio Solano. He was born in 1941, the eldest of 5 children, in a household that had very little and organized that little with precision because precision was the only available substitute for abundance. He came to this country at 22 with a credential in mechanical drafting, a practiced English, and the specific quality of attention that people develop when they have learned that overlooking details carries a cost they cannot afford. He spent 31 years as a senior draftsman and later a design reviewer at a civil engineering firm called Kellerman and Voss, where his supervisor for his final 12 years was a man named Douglas Brahe, who told me at the funeral that Aurelio had caught more specification errors than anyone else on the team and had done it without making the person who made the error feel small. Douglas Brahe said this was rarer than it sounded. Aurelio married my grandmother, Florencia, in 1968. She died in 2014. After that, he lived alone in the house on Garfield Avenue, a 4-bedroom colonial that he and Florencia had bought in 1977 and maintained the way he maintained everything, with consistent attention and without drama. The house had been paid off since 2001. Aurelio did not discuss its value at family gatherings. He discussed it with his accountant, a methodical man named Stuart Colby, who had managed his tax filing since 1989, and eventually with his estate attorney, a woman named Ines Barrow, at a firm called Barrow and Quaid, who had prepared his original estate documents in 2011 and revised them, at his direction, in 2019. My family is large in the way of families that expand through marriages and adjacent relationships without necessarily deepening the connections those expansions imply. My grandfather had 2 children, my father, Raphael, and my Aunt Marguerite, who is 9 years older than my father and has occupied the position of family authority for long enough that she has stopped distinguishing it from a right. My father is quieter, more likely to absorb than to confront, and has spent most of his adult life in the configuration of a younger sibling who learned early that certain arguments cost more than they return. I am my father's only child. I grew up in a different city, 3 hours away, and came to know my grandfather primarily through the visits I began making on my own when I was old enough to drive and curious enough to want to. Those visits started when I was 22. I was finishing a degree in urban planning, which is the discipline of understanding how places work, how they are documented, how the decisions made on paper shape the physical world that people actually inhabit, and I had begun to understand that my grandfather's professional life and my academic direction shared a logic that I had not previously articulated. We started talking at the kitchen table, and we did not stop for 8 years. We talked about drafting and documentation and the specific satisfaction of a correctly rendered plan. We talked about the house on Garfield Avenue, the renovation he had done in 2003 when the back addition needed reframing, the permit history he kept in a binder in the basement, the property survey he had commissioned in 2016 when the neighbor's fence moved 2 feet in a direction it had not been authorized to move. He had the survey on file. The fence moved back. I work now as a land use coordinator for a regional planning agency. My work involves reviewing development applications, confirming that proposed projects comply with zoning designations and recorded easements, and the existing documentation of what a parcel of land is permitted to do. I have been doing this for 5 years. I am thorough in the way that my grandfather was thorough, which I understand now is not a coincidence. When I catch a discrepancy in a recorded plat and trace it back to a survey filed in 1974, I think of him. In the winter of my 26th year, I drove up to Garfield Avenue for a long weekend and found my grandfather at the kitchen table with a folder he had asked Ines Barrow to prepare. He said he had been thinking about his affairs and that he had decided to make some changes. He said he wanted to walk through them with me. He said this matter-of-factly, the way he said most things that mattered, without ceremony, as if the weight of a thing was a reason for clarity rather than for delay. He told me he was restructuring his estate documents. He told me he was naming me as primary beneficiary of the trust that held the house on Garfield Avenue and his financial accounts. He told me he was not changing the distribution of other assets, some of which would go to my father and some to Marguerite per terms he had worked out with Ines Barrow over several months. He told me the decision was not impulsive. He said he had been thinking about it since the previous spring, when Marguerite had handled a family matter in a way that had clarified something for him about how she understood their relationship versus how he understood it. He did not detail the incident. He said the details were less important than the conclusion. He asked if I had questions. Asked why he was telling me now rather than leaving it to be discovered after. He said he thought I should know what I was responsible for while he was still available to explain it. He said that was the practical thing. I asked if he was going to tell my father. He said he would tell Raphael what he needed to know in the right sequence. He asked me to take a copy of the trust document and keep it somewhere I would find it. I took the folder. I drove home 3 days later and put it in the second drawer of my filing cabinet under my grandfather's name. I did not tell Marguerite. I did not tell anyone. My grandfather had been specific about the sequence, and I trusted his sequencing for the same reason I trusted everything else about him. He had thought it through. My grandfather died on a Wednesday in late September at 81 from a stroke that his neurologist, Dr. Felicity Onuma, had assessed as a high-probability risk for the previous 2 years given a vascular history that his primary care physician, Dr. Marcus Teal, had been managing since 2018. The stroke was not sudden in the medical sense. It was sudden in every other sense, and I drove the 3 hours to Garfield Avenue the same afternoon I received the call. Marguerite was already there. She had arrived before my father, who was coming from the opposite direction. She was in the kitchen when I came in, organizing the things that people organize when they need something to do with their hands, the papers on the counter, the items from the refrigerator that needed to be dealt with, the list of people to call. She is efficient in the way of people who mistake efficiency for authority, and she moved through Aurelio's kitchen with the particular confidence of someone who has already decided what role she is playing. I said hello. She said hello. We did not have a substantive conversation that evening about the estate. That was appropriate. Aurelio had been dead for 6 hours. I drove to my father's hotel when he arrived, and we ate dinner at a diner near the hotel and talked about my grandfather for 3 hours, and I did not mention the folder in my filing cabinet. The sequence my grandfather had specified had not yet arrived. The funeral was on a Saturday, 8 days after the death. It was attended by more people than I had expected. Former colleagues from Kellerman and Voss, neighbors from Garfield Avenue who had known Aurelio and Florencia since the Carter administration, members of the community organization he had been part of for 23 years, people whose connection to him was specific and long and whose presence at the service told me something about who he had been when none of us were watching. Douglas Brahe sat in the third row. He stayed for the full reception. Marguerite organized the service. She did this competently and with evident investment. I am noting this plainly, because the story I am telling is not about a person who did nothing correctly. It is about a person who confused organizing the service with inheriting the authority it memorialized. Ines Barrow contacted my father and me jointly, 11 days after the funeral, in a letter sent to both our addresses simultaneously. The letter outlined the trust structure, confirmed our respective designations, and scheduled an initial meeting at Barrow and Quaid to begin the administration process. It did not go to Marguerite because Marguerite was not a primary beneficiary of the trust. She was named in a separate testamentary instrument that disposed of specific non-trust assets, items of personal property, and a modest financial account that Aurelio had kept outside the trust structure for reasons Ines Barrow had explained to him and that he had accepted as practical. The letter was sent on a Thursday. By the following Sunday, Marguerite had scheduled a mediation. I found out on Sunday evening from Danny's forwarded text. I read it in my kitchen. I drank half a glass of water. I went to the filing cabinet. I called Ines Barrow's emergency line and left a message. She called me back within the hour, which told me something about how she ran her practice. She confirmed that she had already been notified of the mediation through the Whitfield Center's intake process, which sends automatic notifications to attorneys of record for estate matters when a mediation is scheduled involving their clients. She confirmed that she had submitted the trust document to the mediator's office that same morning, standard protocol. She confirmed that the mediator, a licensed civil mediator named Theodora Marsh, would have the full trust documentation in hand before the session opened. Asked if I needed to bring anything. Ines Barrow said I could bring a copy for my own reference, but that the mediator would be working from the documents already submitted. I said I would be there. She said, I know. Tuesday morning, Whitfield Center, Suite 4. The building is a converted office park in a suburb 20 minutes from Garfield Avenue. Neutral carpet, institutional lighting, the kind of space designed to be inoffensive to all parties, which means it is interesting to none of them. I arrived at 9:50. The receptionist, a young woman named Clara, who wore a lanyard with her name on it, confirmed my name and directed me to Suite 4. I signed in. I sat down in one of the chairs along the wall. Marguerite arrived at 9:57 with her attorney, a man named Patrick Veal, and two cousins I recognized from the funeral, Sonia and Garrett, who are Marguerite's adult children and who had apparently been included in whatever the family thread had been planning since Sunday. They entered in a group, said nothing to me, and arranged themselves at the table inside the suite when Theodora Marsh opened the door at 10 o'clock precisely. There were 7 of us in the room. Marguerite, Patrick Veal, Sonia, Garrett, my father Raphael, Ines Barrow, and me. Theodora Marsh sat at the head of the table. She was a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a cord and a folder in front of her that I recognized from the tab visible at the edge as the document set she had received from Ines Barrow's office. Theodora Marsh opened the session by introducing herself and confirming her role, licensed civil mediator, retained by the requesting party to facilitate discussion of estate matters following the death of Aurelio Solano. She said she had reviewed the materials submitted by all parties prior to the session. She said she would begin by reading a summary of the operative estate document so that all parties were working from the same factual basis. Patrick Veal said his client had not submitted any documents to the mediator's office. Theodora Marsh said she was aware of that. She said the document in her folder had been submitted by the attorney of record for the estate, per the Whitfield Center's standard intake protocol for estate mediations. Patrick Veal's hand, which had been resting on the table next to a yellow legal pad, went still. Theodora Marsh opened the folder. She read the trust document's full title, The Aurelio Marcos Solano Revocable Living Trust, established 2019, amended 2021. She read the trustee designation. She read the primary beneficiary designation, which named me by full legal name, Petra Camila Solano, as primary beneficiary of the trust assets, which included the property at the Garfield Avenue address and the financial accounts held in trust. She read this in a level, professional voice, without pause or editorial comment, The way a person reads a document when the document is the point, and anything added to it would be a subtraction. The room was quiet when she finished. Marguerite said, "That can't be right." Theodora Marsh said, "I'm reading from the document on file." Patrick Veal said he would need to review the document before the session continued. Theodora Marsh said the document was available for review and that she would allow 5 minutes for that purpose. I looked at the table surface in front of me. I had brought the folder from my filing cabinet. I had not opened it. I did not open it now. Marguerite looked at Patrick Veal. Patrick Veal looked at the document Theodora Marsh had slid across the table. He read for 3 minutes. His expression during those 3 minutes did not change in any way that I would describe as dramatic. It changed in the way that a person's expression changes when they are revising an estimate and the revision is significant. He said something quietly to Marguerite that I could not hear. Marguerite said, "She manipulated him." Theodora Marsh said, "I need to pause the session here. If there is a claim of undue influence, that is a matter for the courts, not for mediation. Mediation proceeds on the basis of the documents as filed. If you believe the filed documents are the result of improper conduct, the appropriate venue is a probate court petition, not this session." Patrick Veal said he understood. Theodora Marsh asked if the requesting party wished to continue the session or adjourn. Patrick Veal conferred with Marguerite in a voice too low to follow. Sonia put her hand flat on the table. Garrett looked at the window. Patrick Veal said they would adjourn. Theodora Marsh noted the adjournment in the session record. She said the session had lasted 11 minutes. She thanked everyone for their time. She gathered her folder. I picked up my folder from the table unopened and stood. My father was beside me. Ines Barrow was on my other side. We walked out together into the hallway with a neutral carpet and the institutional lighting, and I did not say anything until we were in the parking lot. What I said, when we were outside, was that I needed to stop for gas on the way home. Ines Barrow looked at me for a moment. Then she said she would be in touch about the next steps in the administration. My father said he was going to find something to eat, and did I want to come? I said yes. The probate petition came 23 days after the mediation. Patrick Veal filed it on behalf of Marguerite, asserting 2 grounds: undue influence and diminished capacity at the time the 2021 amendment was executed. Ines Barrow had anticipated both. In the 2 years between the 2021 amendment and my grandfather's death, Ines Barrow had, at Aurelio's explicit request, documented 3 separate capacity assessments. The first was performed by Dr. Marcus Teal in February 2021, the month the amendment was signed. The second was performed by a neuropsychologist named Dr. Adiz Orji in April 2021, 6 weeks after the amendment, as a follow-up to the vascular history concerns Dr. Felicity Onuma had been tracking. The third was performed by Dr. Marcus Teal again in November 2022, as part of a standard annual review. All 3 assessments were in Ines Barrow's file. All 3 confirmed full cognitive capacity. Dr. Adiz Orji's assessment was 22 pages and included standardized testing across 6 cognitive domains. It had been prepared at my grandfather's request, coordinated through Ines Barrow's office, at a cost of $3,400 that my grandfather had paid out of pocket because, as he told Ines Barrow at the time, he wanted the assessment to be thorough enough that no one could argue with it later. He had thought it through twice. Patrick Veal's office received Ines Barrow's response to the petition, which included all 3 assessments, within the standard filing window. The petition review process was handled by a probate court examiner named Howard Linz, who worked under the supervision of a court-appointed referee named Patricia Galloway. Howard Linz's examination took 9 weeks. His written recommendation to the court found insufficient grounds to advance the petition to a full hearing. Patricia Galloway concurred. The petition was dismissed. Marguerite did not file a further appeal. Patrick Veal's office sent a formal notice of withdrawal to Ines Barrow's office 6 weeks after the dismissal. Ines Barrow forwarded it to me with a one-line note: "Administration can proceed. Call when convenient." I called the following morning. The trust administration began in earnest that week. The administration of Aurelio's estate took 16 months. I will give you the shape of it rather than each step, because the shape is what matters and the steps are documented in a file that Ines Barrow and I built together over that year and 4 months with the same attention my grandfather would have recognized. The house on Garfield Avenue was appraised by a licensed residential appraiser named Carla Ben at $463,000. The financial accounts held in trust, a brokerage account managed through a firm called Stratum Investments, where Aurelio's advisor had been a careful man named Owen Falk, and a money market account at a regional bank, combined to $214,670 at the date of death. The personal property inventory was handled by an estate specialist named Raymond Chu, who documented the insured contents at $16,800. The non-trust assets, the items and account that went to Marguerite per the separate testamentary instrument, were distributed per that document within the standard window. Ines Barrow handled the transfer documentation. Marguerite received what Aurelio had designated for her. She did not acknowledge the distribution in any communication to me directly. I made the decision about the house in the 11th month of the administration. I had been living 3 hours away and had been driving to Garfield Avenue every few weeks during the process to coordinate with Carla Ben's appraisal, to work with Owen Falk on the account transfers, to walk through the house with Raymond Chu during the inventory. Each time I came back, I stayed a little longer. I walked the permit binder in the basement. I looked at the property survey my grandfather had commissioned in 2016, filed in a sleeve at the back of the binder. I sat at the kitchen table where we had gone through folders for 8 years. I listed the house with a residential agent named Sandra Koike at Koike and Associates at a listing price of $471,000. It sold in the 4th week of listing to a family who had been looking in the neighborhood for 8 months and who, according to Sandra Koike, had specifically wanted a house with a documented renovation history. I thought Aurelio would have found that appropriate. The closing was handled by a title specialist named Francis O'Moley at Landmark Title. It completed on a Thursday morning. The proceeds of the sale, combined with the financial account distributions, brought the total trust distribution to $674,300 after Ines Barrow's administration fees, appraisal costs, and title work. My portion, as primary beneficiary, was distributed per the trust terms within the standard window following closing. I did not do anything dramatic with the money on the day it cleared. I updated the relevant entries in my own financial records. Then I drove to the hardware store, a different errand from the one I mentioned, at a different hardware store in a different city, and bought the replacement porch light fixture I had been meaning to install for 6 weeks. My relationship with Marguerite, since the mediation has been civil in the way that things are civil, when both parties understand that the argument has been settled by a document and not by either of them. We have been in the same room at family gatherings twice. We do not avoid each other. We speak when speaking is appropriate and we leave space between those occasions, which is a different thing from estrangement and which I think is, in this case, accurate to what the relationship actually is. Sonia called me 3 months after the petition dismissal. She said she wanted me to know she had not known, going into the mediation, what Patrick Veal had reviewed in preparation. She said Marguerite had told her the meeting was a formality, that the trust would be reclassified because the amendment was clearly not what Aurelio had intended. Sonia said she had understood after the 11 minutes in that room that this had not been the right framing and that she was sorry for her part in it. I said I appreciated the call. I meant it. Sonia had been operating on her mother's account of events, and her mother's account of events had not included the documents. Garrett has not called. I don't expect him to, and I don't need him to. My father and I have become closer in the way that losses sometimes permit, not through the loss itself, but through the space the loss opens up, the conversations that become possible when the person who made certain conversations unnecessary is no longer present to make them unnecessary. We talk more than we did. We talk about Aurelio, and about the years when my father was the younger sibling in a family arrangement that left less room for him than it should have. He told me once that he had known, somewhere, that his father had made a decision about the estate that reflected something real. He said he was glad the document existed. I said I was too. My grandfather's permit binder is in my office. I brought it from the basement of Garfield Avenue during one of the late visits, when the house was already sold, and I was doing a final walkthrough before the closing date. I had Inespero confirm that it was personal property not subject to the trust inventory. It was a maintenance record, not an asset, and I took it home in the back seat of my car wrapped in a plastic bag, so the basement damp didn't damage the pages. It lives on the shelf above my desk, between the trust administration file and the zoning code binders I use for work. The most recent entry in my grandfather's handwriting is dated September 2022, 13 months before his death. Inspection completed, no deficiencies noted, certificate renewed. His handwriting in that entry is exactly what it always was. Precise. Without excess. The entry of a man who maintained what he had built and kept the record because the record was the proof, and the proof was the thing that held. There are two things I want to say before you go, and then a question. The first thing is about my grandfather's decision to document the capacity assessments. He did not do this because he was afraid. He did this because he understood, from 31 years of reviewing specifications and catching the errors that other people made in good faith, that a document which anticipates the challenge is worth more than a document that merely states the intention. He built the trust to hold. He then built the evidence that would allow it to hold against the argument that it shouldn't. He did this at 80 years old, at his own expense, before anyone had made any argument at all. The second thing is about the folder I brought to Whitfield Center and never opened. I had brought it because I thought I might need it. I did not need it. The mediator already had the document. My grandfather's attorney had submitted it 48 hours before the session, through the intake process, as a matter of standard protocol. I sat in that room for 11 minutes with a folder in front of me that I never opened because everything necessary had already been filed. This is the thing I want you to hold. The work that protects you does not happen in the room. It happens in the years before the room, in the filing cabinets and the appointments and the decisions made quietly, in sequence, by people who understand that preparation is not the same thing as anticipation of conflict. It is simply the accurate way to build something that is meant to last. A thing built right does not need you to defend it in the room. It only needs you to show up. Here's my question. Theodora Marsh had been a licensed civil mediator for 18 years when she opened that session. She had handled, by the estimate she gave in a brief exchange I had with her in the hallway after the adjournment, somewhere in the range of 400 estate mediations. She had seen documents submitted in advance before. She had seen sessions adjourn early before. What I have wondered since that Tuesday is what she noted in the session record after we left. Not the adjournment itself. The session record is a formal document, and I have a copy of it. I mean what she wrote in her own notes, the working notes that a mediator keeps separate from the official record, after the last person left Suite 4 and she was alone at the table with the folder she had received from Inespero's office. Tell me what you think she wrote. Not the formal record, the first line of her own notes. I'll tell you what I think it was in the comments. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. New stories every week, and I stay for every long comment. Take care of yourselves.